So in early 2026, one of the, most famous car manufacturers on Earth submitted this legally mandated document to the U.S. government. And it basically said, we aren't really a car company anymore.
Right, which is just a stunning admission, honestly, hiding right there in plain sight. I mean, you'd expect an automaker to talk almost exclusively about, like, sheet metal and profit
Yeah,
margins, right?
exactly.
But this document, it reads more like the operational blueprint for an entirely new species of artificial intelligence.
Totally. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking directly at the source material today, which is Tesla's Form 10K for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2025.
And, while Wall Street is busy scanning these 100 pages for quarterly profit margins, we're really looking at the diary entries hidden in the risk factors.
Right. Because our mission today is to extract this hidden narrative of a massive corporate pivot toward real-world AI and robotics, all while they're navigating this radically altered political landscape in early 2026.
Yeah, and the story embedded in here, it impacts everything from how you will literally commute to work over the next decade to the stability of the physical power grid in your neighborhood.
And don't worry, you really don't need a finance degree to understand this. We're going to completely skip the dried accounting today.
Oh, absolutely.
We're focusing strictly on the technological leaps, these massive global chess moves, and the surprising risks that are just hiding in plain sight. So let's jump right into this identity crisis.
Let's do.
The very first thing this 10K reveals is that they are no longer defining themselves by the electric cars they produce. The mission is now explicitly stated as building a world of amazing abundance by bringing AI into the physical world.
And that distinction, the physical world is literally everything. Think about it. We spent the last few years completely obsessed with digital AI, right?
Oh yeah, like the chatbots writing essays or the image generators making art.
Exactly. But those live on servers. They interact with you strictly through a two-dimensional screen. What this document outlines is the operationalization of AI in physical three-dimensional space.
Right. I mean, it reads less like a traditional automaker's annual report and more like a sci-fi operating system that's just scaling up.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
It's almost like a hardware company realizing that the metal, the glass, the wheels, that's all just the vessel.
Yeah.
The actual product they're selling is the digital brain inside.
And they're rapidly expanding the types of vessels that carry that brain. I mean, the 10K details the June 2025 launch of their Robotaxi service, which is this ride-hailing platform currently operating with their standard Model Y vehicles.
Okay.
But they also lay out the groundwork for the Cybercab, which is described in the document as a purpose-built autonomous vehicle.
Wait, hold on. If I'm understanding the timeline laid out here correctly, they're trying to mass manufacture their current lineups of the Models 3, Y, S, X, and the Cybertruck, while simultaneously launching an entirely new ride-hailing service.
Yeah.
And building a ground-up autonomous taxi. That sounds like a logistical nightmare that would just completely fracture a company's focus. How realistically can they juggle all that?
I mean, it absolutely is a massive logistical strain, but you have to see the underlying through line to understand why they're doing it. They aren't just juggling random mobility projects.
What do you mean?
Well, the cars you buy and drive are actively subsidizing and accelerating the autonomous network. The millions of human-driven cars currently on the road, they're essentially functioning as data-gathering tentacles.
Tentacles, okay, that's a vivid image.
Right. But every single time a driver navigates a tricky four-way stop or, avoids a pedestrian jumping out in the rain, the car's cameras capture that specific video.
So the human drivers are basically doing all the homework for the AI.
That is the exact mechanism. That massive ocean of real-world video is fed back to central supercomputers to train their neural networks. Training an AI is essentially like sending it to university.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah, it requires massive centralized compute power to learn the rules of physics, geometry, and human behavior.
But the car itself doesn't have a massive supercomputer in the trunk, right? So how does it actually use that central education when it's driving down the highway?
That is where the concept of inference comes in. And the 10K highlights this technological leap beautifully. They are designing their own custom silicon in-house inference chips.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So if training is the AI studying for the final exam in a massive data center, inference is the AI actually taking the test in real time on the road.
I see.
When a child runs into the street, the car's onboard inference chip has to process the camera data and apply all its training to hit the brakes in milliseconds. They aren't just writing the software, they are building specialized hardware to make that instantaneous decision possible.
Okay, so they're perfecting this artificial brain inside the cars. But here is where the document takes a wild turn. It's not just vehicles anymore, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah, because the 10K heavily emphasizes the development of bots, specifically the Optimus general-purpose humanoid robot.
Right, because once you solve the underlying intelligence, like how to navigate the unpredictable physics of the real world, you can just download that understanding into an entirely different vessel.
So the physical shape of the machine changes from 4 wheels to 2 legs, but the foundational layer is the exact same neural network.
Exactly. It's trained on billions of miles of real-world driving.
Wow. So the brain learning to avoid a pothole at 60 miles an hour is the exact same brain learning to walk across a factory floor and pick up a box.
Yeah, it's wild to think about.
And if you're listening to this, this is why the fundamental concept of personal mobility is shifting right beneath our feet. We're moving away from a product that sits idle in your driveway for 90% of its life to an autonomous service you just hail on demand.
Right.
And the same intelligence that drives you to the grocery store is being designed to eventually unpack the groceries right in your kitchen.
But, we have to ground this in physical reality for a second. To train an AI brain of that magnitude and to deploy millions of autonomous machines constantly communicating with a central network, you can't just plug a server into the wall.
Right. It requires an unfathomable amount of computing power.
Yes.
Which brings us to the infrastructure laid out in the 10K, because computing power requires raw physical electricity. In 2025, the document notes they massively expanded their Cortex AI training cluster at Gigafactory, Texas.
And they aren't stopping there. They note active construction on Cortex 2 to multiply that capacity even further.
Yeah, and these aren't just like server closets. These are data centers so massive they look and function like their own industrial cities.
Absolutely. And the document notes a new 2025 collaboration with Samsung to manufacture advanced semiconductors right here in the US just to supply these massive training clusters.
I want to push back on something here, though. We look at these massive investments in supercomputers, and then I look at the energy generation and storage segment of this 10K.
Okay, yeah.
They detailed the massive growth of Megapacks, which are these utility-scale batteries, and a software called Autobidder. When I read this, it sounds to me like they are secretly just becoming a heavy-duty utility company.
Right.
I mean, are they just pivoting to be the next local power provider?
Well, I wouldn't call them a secret utility company. It's probably more accurate to say they're building a highly defensive, closed-loop ecosystem.
What do you mean by defensive?
They aren't trying to replace your local power provider. They're trying to protect their own AI ambitions from local power failures. The 10K explicitly states that AI infrastructure is driving rapid electrical load growth globally.
Right. I mean, the power grid is already straining under the weight of traditional data centers, let alone these massive new Cortex AI clusters.
And that is the exact vulnerability. The physical hardware, the cars and the robots, is completely useless without the neural net. And the neural net is useless without the Cortex supercomputers to train it. And those supercomputers demand massive, uninterrupted grid energy. If the grid goes down, the entire AI evolution stops dead in its tracks.
So how does their energy segment actually fix that? Like, explain this Autobidder software to me, because it sounds a bit like high-frequency stock trading, but for electricity.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it, actually. Autobidder is basically an algorithmic trading platform for the energy grid.
Okay.
Let's say you have a massive installation of their Megapack batteries connected to a solar farm. Autobidder constantly monitors the fluctuations of the local energy grid.
Right.
During the middle of the day, when the sun is shining brightly and household energy demand is relatively low, power is incredibly cheap. So Autobidder automatically buys that cheap power and stores it in the Megapacks.
And then at 6 o'clock in the evening, when everyone gets home from work, cranks up their air conditioning and plugs in their cars, the grid strains, and the price of power spikes.
Yes. And in milliseconds, Autobidder sells that stored energy back to the grid at a massive premium. It performs energy arbitrage.
Wow.
It stabilizes the grid by injecting power exactly when it's needed most, which prevents rolling blackouts while simultaneously generating massive revenue.
So they are the primary catalyst for the massive new energy demand via their AI clusters.
Yep.
And they are simultaneously selling the battery and software solutions required to prevent that demand from crashing the grid.
Exactly.
They've positioned themselves to profit on both sides of the equation. If you're wondering why your local utility company is suddenly installing fields of industrial batteries, this is why. The AI revolution is physically altering the infrastructure of your neighborhood.
But building these massive megapack farms and AI data centers doesn't just require clever software. It requires millions of tons of physical materials, lithium, copper, specialized components.
And suddenly you aren't just trying to solve a complex physics problem in a vacuum. You're going head-to-head with global trade wars and volatile domestic politics.
Oh, absolutely.
Which brings us to the political reality check in this document. Now, looking at this strictly through the clinical lens of business impact, and just to be clear, we aren't taking political sides here, just reporting the facts of the SEC filing the political landscape, took a dramatic and highly challenging turn in 2025.
It was a severe disruption to their entire consumer pricing model, to be exact.
Yeah, the big shockwave detailed in the document is the July 4, 2025 enactment of a law called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBBA.
Right.
According to the filing, OBBBA substantially curtailed the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. It fully repealed the individual consumer tax credits for electric vehicles and residential energy property, and it slapped incredibly stringent traceability requirements on raw materials.
And you combine that with major alterations to U.S. trade policy, highlighted in the document, specifically heightened import tariffs and retaliatory measures from trade partners, and you just have a massive supply chain headache.
I mean, think about the mechanics of what just happened to their sales model. It's like they were running a marathon with a massive tailwind of tax credits, and suddenly, on July 4th, the wind completely reversed.
That's a great analogy.
For years, the EV tax credit acted like a government-subsidized down payment. It artificially lowered the barrier to entry for millions of consumers, making the cars highly competitive on price against gas vehicles.
Yep.
When that vanished overnight on July 4th, the effective price of the vehicle shot up for the average buyer. And simultaneously, the new tariffs made the raw materials more expensive to import for the manufacturer. They're getting squeezed on both ends.
Severely.
How does a massive corporation suddenly adapt to that kind of dual shock?
Well, by completely rewiring both their supply chain and their sales model simultaneously.
Okay.
First, to combat the tariffs and those strict traceability rules of OBBBA, the 10K shows they're aggressively localizing supply. They legally note their historical reliance on single-source suppliers in Asia, like CATL and Panasonic for battery cells, as a major risk factor.
Right.
Because if a new tariff hits an imported battery cell, your profit margin on the entire car evaporates instantly.
So they have to build the entire battery ecosystem here in the U.S.
Which is incredibly difficult. But the document notes the opening of their own in-house lithium refinery in Texas in January 2026.
What?
Yeah, they're taking the most critical, complex part of battery production, refining the raw lithium into their own hands on U.S. soil just to insulate themselves from international trade disputes.
Okay, so that attempts to solve the manufacturing side. But what about the consumer? If a buyer can no longer afford the car because the government took away their $7,500 down payment, what is the company's play to keep volume moving?
They essentially have to act as the bank themselves. The 10K outlines a massive push into new leasing products launched in the fourth quarter of 2025. You lower the monthly payment through a lease to keep the consumer engaged.
That makes sense.
But more importantly, this regulatory shock actually accelerates the strategic importance of the Robotaxi service we talked about earlier.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. If the individual buyer is priced out of ownership, you just bypass ownership entirely.
Yes, you move the financial burden completely away from the individual. You offer them rides on demand. The company owns the depreciating asset, and the consumer just pays a few dollars for the service.
Right.
The regulatory hurdle forces the transition from a traditional sales model to a continuous service model.
That is a fascinating strategic pivot. And it's a stark reminder for anyone listening. Whether you're in the market for an EV, looking at putting solar on your roof, or just trying to understand market shifts, these sweeping 2025 policy shifts directly dictate the effective price of green technology.
Exactly.
A stroke of a pen in Washington radically altered this company's entire financial reality overnight.
And it forces them to rely on incredibly advanced technology to offset those financial losses. Which brings us to the most unpredictable and arguably most fragile variable in this entire operation.
The human element. Because you can engineer the most advanced silicon inference chips in the world, and you can build a massive lithium refinery in Texas. But operational risk always comes back to humans.
Always.
The company currently employs nearly 135,000 people globally, and the filing explicitly highlights unionization risks, noting recent unfair labor practice charges filed with the National Labor Relations Board.
It's a striking contrast, honestly. The ultimate mission is building autonomous robots that don't need breaks or paychecks. But the current reality is they still desperately need over 100,000 human beings to tighten bolts, write code, and keep the factory lights on.
But the human risk doesn't just sit on the factory floor, does it? It goes all the way up to the C-suite. One of the most glaring disclosures in this entire document is their key employee risk factor.
Yeah, it is a highly unusual legal disclosure for a company of this scale. I mean, the document legally notes a heavy reliance on the CEO, which is standard boilerplate for most companies.
Sure.
What isn't standard is the explicit admission that the CEO does not devote his full time and attention to the company.
Yes, it lists out his other ventures right there in the SEC filing: SpaceX, XAI, Neuralink, and the Boring Company. He is concurrently managing orbital rockets, brain-computer interfaces, tunneling logistics, and a completely separate AI startup.
To formally disclose to federal regulators that your chief executive is splitting his time 5 different ways across massive, complex, bleeding-edge industries, that is a neon sign pointing to extreme operational vulnerability.
So let's explore the real-world impact of that vulnerability.
Yeah.
Because elsewhere in the risk factors, they highlight intense product liability.
Right.
They mention a standing general order from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration requiring reports on any crashes involving advanced driver assistance systems. They also note the inherent unpredictable risks of lithium-ion battery fires.
Yeah, those are major flags.
So think about this setup. They're deploying 4,000-pound autonomous robots onto public streets. It is a regulatory tightrope. How vulnerable is this entire multi-billion-dollar operation if the guy holding the balancing pole is simultaneously trying to launch rockets?
It's a fair question.
Or what happens if a single high-profile autonomous robotaxi crash triggers a massive regulatory freeze?
You've hit on the existential tension at the core of their entire business model. It represents a fundamental shift in legal and moral liability. Think about the traditional automotive model.
Huh?
If a human driver gets distracted and crashes a car, the legal liability almost always falls on the human. But when you transition to an autonomous robotaxi network, you completely remove the human driver.
Right.
The liability shifts directly from the individual consumer onto the manufacturer.
The company literally becomes the driver of millions of vehicles simultaneously.
It is a high-stakes gamble of unprecedented scale. They are pioneering a technology that demands near perfection in an incredibly imperfect, unpredictable physical world.
Yeah, no kidding.
If an autonomous system fails at scale, the regulatory backlash wouldn't just be a monetary fine. It could pause their entire operational model indefinitely. They're attempting to navigate this high-wire act while relying on an executive team whose attention is, by their own legal admission, intensely divided.
It is just a staggering balancing act. Okay, let's take a breath and recap the journey we just took through what most people would dismiss as a dry, boring financial document.
Seriously.
We started with the manufacturer officially admitting they were pivoting into an AI and robotics entity driven by a mission to create physical abundance.
And then we examine the sheer scale of the energy and supercomputing infrastructure, the Cortex clusters and the closed-loop Megapacks systems required to actually power and train those neural nets without crashing the global power grid.
Right. And we navigated the stark reality of the 2025 political landscape, specifically how the OBBA legislation stripped away the government's subsidized down payment for EVs, forcing a massive pivot to leasing, robotaxis, and localizing supply chains like that Texas lithium refinery.
And finally, we confronted the very real human risks at the center of it all. From a CEO splitting his time 5 ways to the massive legal liability of deploying autonomous vehicles on public roads.
If you are listening to this, you just absorbed the most critical strategic insights of a 100-page SEC filing in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. You are now significantly more informed about the future of energy and mobility than most people skimming the headlines today.
Absolutely.
But before we go, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. It builds on everything we've discussed. The 10K clearly states they are applying their autonomous driving AI to their humanoid Optimus robots for future commercialization.
Right. The intelligence gained on the highway is actively being transferred to the factory floor.
Exactly. So here is a thought to ponder as you go about your day. If a company successfully solves real-world navigation to drive our cars and then applies that exact same artificial brain to millions of humanoid robots walking among us, at what point does an auto manufacturer accidentally become the primary architect of the new human workforce?
That is a fascinating question.
Thank you for diving deep with us today.